Welcome back. So now that we have roles available in the database, we start pulling them down. We have pretty much everything available to actually start defining what routes we can actually go to using the specific roles. So what I'm going to do in the next couple of lessons is, or hopefully only this lesson if we are fast enough, we're going to add this part of code to each of our routes, and then we're going to pass in, if we want to, a set of roles that this route is only available for. So in this case, this route would only be available for educator and admin users, right? So all other roles would be redirected to the login. That's kind of the goal for these roles. They're only activatable if you have educator or admin inside the AuthGuard. So how do we do this? Well, step one is we need to now be able to actually pull out a single user from the key. So this is pretty much how you actually go in and grab a single user using a unique key to get that information using the object call in Angular Fire. So this will return an observable with an actual user inside it. So let's try and have a look at how the database looks. I'll go to the Firebase console here, and if I scroll down, this is the actual ID I'm looking for. And that ID, if you notice, it's WFM, and that's actually the same ID I have here for my user. So that means that when I've logged in, I can actually pass that ID and grab all the information about the user, including the role. So that's my goal, to actually create some way to actually get the real user from the database where I store my roles. So that's why when I get user now, I can send in a key from the Auth setup, and then I can actually get the real user that I've created in the database. That's kind of the goal of the user service that I created here. What else did we change? Well, the Auth service is also changed. Let's start out with the current user one. This is how we did the current user before, and I told you in earlier videos we're going to change this later, and now is later. So we're going to change it into something looking like this. Instead of just returning the auth, we're actually going to use something very cool called the switchMap. Now the switchMap ends up, instead of returning, this guy returned a Firebase auth state. But the switchMap is kind of a way for us to use observables to explain to the observable, you're going to pass the information from the first observable, which is this Firebase auth state. You're going to pass that into a new function that's also an observable, and that observable is actually using the switch map. Then the second observable is the only one that we're going to return. Now, I don't know if that makes sense for you, but maybe watch the video again if it doesn't, because it's very important to start understanding the switch map. But what I'm doing is pretty much saying, I'm going to call this auth service and switch, sending in the information that we get from the first observable, which is this guy, and we just pass that on to a new observable, and that's actually the observable we return. But I also ask if the auth state is null, right? If it's not null, then actually go in and grab the information of the user. If it is null, then just return a nullable observable. So that's how this guy works right here. So I hope that makes sense. I'll put something in the comments and we'll talk about it. It's very tough to look at these observables in the beginning, at least that's my feeling, but just have a look at them and maybe they make more and more sense each time you do. Now the second time that we use this now is actually to specify which role this guy actually has. So now inside is authenticated, which is the one we're using inside our AuthGuard, meaning that in here we need to return a true-false boolean to actually make this interface work. We have to return an observable of boolean type. So what we're doing is we're saying in the auth is authenticated, sending in a list of roles from somewhere, which is, I'll show you where that roles list is coming from, but it's just an array of roles. So in this case, it could be like educator and admin, right? You get the point here. So I might send in that list and pass it on to is authenticated right here in my auth service. So now if I go back to the auth service, the is authenticated can now actually get a list of roles when it's trying to authenticate itself, and then we are grabbing, notice that this is actually the function up here that we're calling, returning the actual user. And all we have to do now is using again a switch map, because I don't want to return this observable. I actually want to create a new observable, which I'm doing down here, and return that one. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, take the user you get from the first observable, pass it on to the second observable. And then that user, we're going to say if there are roles sent from the outside, so meaning that if I'm actually sending in roles here and not just a null value here, so if I'm sending in roles like I'm doing right now, then if there are roles, then go in and say if the role is actually inside the role of the user, this guy right here, if he's an admin for instance, and that's inside the list of roles, then return true. So if there is a user and he contains the roles list, contains that role the user has, return true. He's authenticated. If there's no roles here available, then just ask if he's actually logged in, because then you'll actually return is he authenticated or not. So that's kind of the goal. So if there's no roles, then just make sure he's authenticated. If there are roles, then check if the roles are actually acceptable. So that's pretty much all we're doing here. Then the AuthGuard, we are grabbing a list of roles. Now this is new as well, so let me try and show you this as the last thing this lesson. By sending in the end here of your path, I put in the path, I put in the component I want to hit, I put in if I have an activation, meaning that if I have a rule saying you're not allowed to log in unless you actually something, the AuthGuard that we just talked about up here, I'll go back to it in a second. And then I can pass some data to that AuthGuard actually. So that's what we're doing here in the end. I'm passing data to the AuthGuard saying for actually hitting the users you have to be an educator or an admin. So going back here to the AuthGuard, I'm getting in here, sending in, using the route. This is actually how you use a route, passing data no matter where you're actually looking. And then I'm saying pull out the route data of roles and convert it into an array of strings. Like this. Then send that array of strings into authentication, the one we just created in the auth service, right here, and return true or false depending on if he is authenticated or not. And if we are not authenticated, send me to the login page. That's all we had to do. Now we actually have roles in our system locally here, so we can start actually making sure that you have the right roles. And just to prove this to you, let me just try and change one thing. First of all, let's look at the application running. Let me just try and go back here, and here we have the actual logged in user. If I go into users, everything is fine. Now let's fake that we don't have the right role, and I'm just going to do it. There are many ways to do it. Let me just fake that when I actually check if he has the right role, I just put in the wrong value here, explaining he doesn't have the right role. Now he just was redirected to the login page automatically. And if I try to go back to the /users, you'll see because I don't have the right roles for users, I'll be redirected to the login page. So that's roles for you. That's all you had to do. Have a look at the code, try and watch the videos a few times, maybe it makes sense. See you next time, we will work with even more of this great stuff.